Welcome. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is Sunday, December 22nd, 2019. I don't know. I saw the episode number, and it looked like it said 2353, which is weird. How do we get 53 weeks in a year? I don't know, but this is like season 23. We're coming down to the end. This is the last live show of 2019. We're going to close the studio down and let people have some time with family and friends. I think there's a possibility there's like some kind of clip show or something happening next week. I don't know. Mark knows. I just show up and talk.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy. I'm your host this week, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me, my friend Dragnauct Sylvas.
Hello there, folks.
And I'm going to let you, in just a minute, once I get the announcements out of the way, kind of do an introduction because we knew each other kind of obliquely through Magic Sandwich Show and other stuff like that.
Truck stops, bathroom stalls.
Yeah. Shh. And then at the Free Flow convention, we actually got to meet and talk and everything else.
Right.
And it came up rather quickly of visiting of, hey, why don't you come over to the Atheist Experience? And now you're here.
Yes, it's like magic.
It is kind of like magic. Quick announcements. There's stuff coming up at the ACA. You could visit the website and find out because I didn't actually take notes because I've been in England for a week. Actually, sorry, I've been in the UK for a week. I actually flew over there as they were voting and landed just after the election results came in, which was fun because despite the party that won having a sizable win, I ran across almost nothing but depressed people.
Really?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they were not happy. And actually, when I went to exchange money, I went up to the travel counter and I said, "Look, I just got here, and I know you've had an election. Do I need to change my dollars for pounds, euros, or is there something new after this election?"
Too soon.
It was great. I had a flight directly from Austin to London. Landed in London. About 4 hours later, I did a kind of conversational debate with Glenn Scrivener on Justin Brierley's Unbelievable Show. That'll be out before long, and I'll post a link to it on Patreon as well. And then went back, visited with a mentalist friend of mine and some other friends from the UK, had dinner, did a walking tour of Cambridge University, and then did the Magic and Skepticism show, or a version of it, at Cambridge University. It was great. It was one of my, actually, these two events were two of my favorites of doing the Magic and Skepticism show. It may have been that, the Q&A session was slightly different. Mm-hmm. I get different questions, somewhat different questions in the UK than I do, in Alabama or Georgia or something like that.
Like what?
Yeah. Well, they're curious about how bad it actually is over here because we're talking with skeptics, so they know they're getting their information that's biased. Like if all you ever see is school shootings, like some people's perception of Texas is that we are all running around with guns on our hips all the time, and
right.
And not all of us, just like 80%. It's not even nearly as bad as you think.
Like my cousin.
But yeah, I did the Cambridge event, and I got to play some snooker, and then we flew up to Glasgow, and it was my first time in Scotland. So thank you to Glasgow Skeptics. Thank you especially to Sean and Cambridge Skeptics for organizing all this and putting it together. I'm going to be back in the UK before long. We don't have a date worked out, but right now we're in the planning stages for a debate this spring in Oxford. And hopefully I can maybe extend that and get to finally visit Wales and Ireland and then I will
all the other little places.
Yeah, hit the parts of the UK that I haven't been to. Turns out, not only are my relatives from Ireland indirectly, but one entire side of my family, my dad's mom's side, are Scottish, and I either hadn't been told or hadn't remembered until I got back home, and I was like, "Oh, I was in Glasgow, Mom," and she's like, "Oh, well, did you look up any of the McCammets?" And I'm like, and no, I wouldn't have just randomly gone through a phone book and. I might be related to you loosely. Would you like to trace, your genealogy back 150, 200 years? But it's always nice to go to the UK because you can sit there and eat at a pub that's older than our entire country.
Wow.
That pub's been sitting there all the time. So there's a bunch of stuff coming up. We hope you have a new year. But you're here with me. You are a scientist and a science student and a science educator who engages people on YouTube and elsewhere, and some of them are waiting on hold. So fill everybody in on your specialty because for the life of me, I could sit here for an hour trying to get it down and probably wouldn't.
Yeah, so I like to just refer to myself as a student of science. I'm about 98% done with my degree in biology with a specialization in cellular, molecular, and biotechnology. And I also do biochemistry research and essential amino acid synthesis. And so that's a lot of words for I look at plants and see how they make the stuff that we eat, basically. So there you go.
You eat plants? What kind of monster are you?
I am the ultimate vegan, except I like meat.
Yeah. Well, it's cool because hopefully we'll get some creationist callers or maybe some theistic callers who perhaps don't have a good enough understanding of science. And quite often when people call into the show, like I have a passing background in some of this stuff. I always find it strange that somebody will call in to the Atheist Experience, which is essentially not a science show.
Right.
And none of us normally have any expertise in this area.
But you're an atheist. You're supposed to know evolution.
Yeah. And they call in to present their theory and tell me everything that's wrong with science and how they've discovered a model that is going to revolutionize everything and prove God. And I'm like, if you'd really done that, wouldn't you be working with other scientists and publishing papers and not calling into, an atheist show?
Probably have a Nobel Prize, something like that, maybe.
I mean, at least be working on it.
Yeah.
And I, like if I was doing that, if I was using science to prove God, I wouldn't call into the Atheist Experience until after like the paper had been published and it was front page news, and I'd be like, see, you were wrong. And rather than just calling in and arguing with you, I did the actual work and demonstrated that you were wrong, and here it is, and now I'm happy to talk about it.
You mean do legwork rather than just making claims?
Well, I mean, I personally wouldn't because I'm crazy lazy. But you'd think some people would.
Right? But what do you expect?
So it's all on you. We have a list. We have a list of callers here.
Yes.
You get to pick who you'd like to speak to first.
Oh, man.
Just line number, whatever.
Man, we have some recognizable names here, one of which will be saved for last. Actually, let's do the number 6.
Line 6. Matt, you are on with Dragnaught and Matt. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm exceptional.
I just had a couple of questions for you that I'd like to ask, and it's great that you have the scientist guy on there because it has to do with the collection of evidence and how one would interpret it as it relates to miracles.
Cool.
Okay, so I've heard you say before in debates that if one was to want to posit a miracle as an explanation for something that took place in the distant past, that they would have to see miracles happening now. Would you agree with that? Or that they would have to be demonstrable?
No, I don't think you would have to see a miracle now in order to confirm a miracle in the past. My answer is okay. I have no idea how one would go about confirming a miracle either in the past or now, but certainly it's more difficult if you're trying to analyze a miracle claim from long in the past.
Okay. And would you say that, if miracles did happen on a very regular basis now and were repeatable scientifically and things of that nature, from a science perspective, would a scientist see something that is, supposedly an anomaly in science, and they were to see that it's repeatable, would they then determine that if they couldn't explain it, that it was a miracle, or would they just call it like an unexplainable natural phenomenon?
If there is a phenomenon that is happening that is inexplicable, right, that we can investigate, then I hate to break it to you, it's not supernatural. So calling it a miracle.
So you would agree that?
Well, the big thing. So there were a couple confusing things in there because it sounded like you said something that was refuted by science. Is that what you said? Or
no, repeatable.
Repeatable
Science.
So we have we have
do tests on it.
I'm trying to understand. You're talking about a phenomenon that is occurring that's repeatable. First of all, we don't define thing as inexplicable because that's a declaration that it is unexplainable, and that's different from unexplained. And so when we observe something and we don't currently have an explanation for it, we keep going until we get an explanation. And at no point does our absence of an explanation mean that we get to say, that's a miracle.
Okay. So, if it was the case that you, say, witnessed maybe 10 or 15 people throughout the course of, the last 150 years or so who died and then were, resurrected, and this could be demonstrably proven by science.
Happens all the time.
The dead.
Happens all the time.
Okay, but I mean,
people. No.
After a public execution.
Okay.
Somebody's beheaded.
Yeah. So we behead somebody, and then 3 days later they're up and walking around, and we've had them under we've had them under proper test conditions where we're observing them the entire time. Yeah, that'd be really incredible. Do you have anything remotely like that?
I know, but my question is, if that was the case, would a scientist then say, "Oh, well, we're going to call this a miracle"? Or would
No.
so
Hang on. Let's get off the miracle label, because that's irrelevant. What would happen is a scientist would say, "Hey, we have a dozen accounts now that are well documented of someone having their head lopped off and then getting up and walking around 3 days. Do we have an explanation for that? No." And until you have an explanation, you don't get to claim what the explanation is. And that goes not only for the scientists who are exploring it, but for the non-scientists who want to claim that it's supernatural. Because supernatural is something that you need to demonstrate.
It would not be ever called a miracle then, right? You would just say...
Somebody would call it a miracle. What difference does it make? Somebody's going to call it a miracle now. What difference does it make if they call it a miracle? What we're talking about here is, can you demonstrate supernatural causation or not?
And the answer would be no from your perspective, I assume. Is that correct?
Has anybody ever demonstrated a mechanism by which we can confirm supernatural causation?
No, of course not. I mean, I also don't think that it's
then we're stuck.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm not saying. Here's the thing. I'm not saying that that's the case forever. Maybe tomorrow somebody will come up with a way to demonstrate that the supernatural is real and show how it can interact with reality and how we can test for that and confirm it. But until that happens, we're stuck.
Now, as that relates to the situation with Jesus and the resurrection and all that, I'm a Christian, so I assume you probably knew I was going there.
But I mean,
if that was the case...
But let me ask you, do you disagree with the conclusion that I reached right there, that until we are able... Okay.
I mean, well, I would feel comfortable positing a supernatural explanation if the person who died and rose again was like, okay, I'm going to die and rise again. And then they did it, and they said God is the mechanism by which this took place. I would actually feel, comfortable taking their word for it. But
see, that's actually a huge mistake, because if I told you that I could levitate in front of you, and then I did it, and then I told you the reason I was able to levitate is because I am in fact God, and you're comfortable just accepting that, you would turn out to be wrong.
Not levitation. I mean, if you were demonstrably dead, though, like if I witnessed you be killed in a public execution,
okay, sure,
and then risen from the dead, that'd be a little bit different. Would you agree?
It would be different, but I wouldn't necessarily accept their claim about it, because that's not confirmation. That's still just a claim. The question I have, though, is you're a Christian, and so
yes.
And so on some level, you are accepting a claim that somebody died, resurrected, and gave credit to God when you don't have any evidence that any of that actually happened.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that there's no evidence that it happened. I mean, there's numerous, witnesses that testified to it.
No, we have no witnesses that account to it.
So Paul is not a witness to the resurrection?
Of course not. Paul didn't know anything about Jesus until after Jesus was already dead.
So if a being, right, just appeared in the sky, right, and blinded you, okay, if that was the case, hypothetically, and then this being communicated with you and said, I'm Jesus, I'm risen from the dead, all these things, you'd be no, I don't believe you.
No. See, this is the thing that you're missing out on. If that happened to me, if some being appeared to me, then I might maybe have good reason to believe it, but nobody else would, because revelation is necessarily first person, according by Hume, and to everybody else it's hearsay. But you're not just going on secondhand accounts. You're accepting a story for which you can verify none of the details, including whether or not the person who's relating the story, you even have an accurate description from them of their account.
Would you only be willing to believe a miracle, on the testimony of another, if the person was alive, or would you be willing to accept...
I wouldn't believe a miracle on testimony. I wouldn't believe a miracle on testimony. I would believe that somebody is...
You would have to say it yourself.
Can I finish?
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely.
I would believe that someone is accurately trying to tell me what happened, but that doesn't mean I should believe their explanation for what happened. And that's a first-hand account. Do you believe people are being abducted by aliens?
No.
Okay, but do you realize that there are people you can talk to right now who will tell you their alien abduction story? That's not supernatural. Yeah. It's not a miracle, and yet you're willing to discount their personal testimony, and yet you will accept a copy of a translation of a copy from somebody who you don't know, can't investigate at all. You're willing to accept that is sufficient evidence of a risen person.
Do you believe some news stories and not other news stories?
I asked you a
Do
question.
believe every news story.
asked
yeah,
you
no, I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable with it because
Okay.
I have spent a lot of time actually
Your
studying
turn,
the
because
textual
I have no interest in speaking with somebody who's perfectly comfortable with dismissing. Shut up, I'm talking.
sorry.
With dismissing some firsthand accounts that are not particularly extraordinary or less extraordinary, and accepting.
I wouldn't necessarily discount all of them.
Okay, so
Never mind.
your issue here is that you're relying on personal anecdotes. Do you see that?
Well, I mean, it would be personal anecdotes from several different people.
That's
it would be
fine. So
multiple sources.
Do multiple anecdotes equal empirical evidence? How does that work?
No, of course not. No,
Okay.
I don't think you can prove a miracle in the same way you can prove science.
Okay,
I think it's ridiculous to suggest that one could.
Now, you would admit that empirical evidence would trump anecdotal evidence, correct?
Well, of course. Yeah, I mean, it'd be better evidence, but it doesn't mean that the other thing didn't happen.
Okay, so while I agree that some anecdotes can actually be true, it can actually reflect reality, but that's contingent, right? Based on what we see in reality. Have you actually seen someone be resurrected, like actually be beheaded? Personally, have you?
No, of course not.
Okay, so then
But I think that if it was the case that it happened enough times throughout history where everybody got to see it, it would be so commonplace that it wouldn't really be accepted as
That is a load of bullshit. That is absolutely a load of bullshit. Because even if it becomes so commonplace that it's no longer extraordinary, like if people were being killed and resurrected daily, that fundamentally does not mean that it would be dismissed in the case of the resurrection that you prefer. This isn't
Jesus' resurrection would remain unique if it happened on a regular basis.
Okay, so now you think it's unique, and
No, I'm asking. I know, I believe it is unique. I think Jesus is the only person who's actually experienced the true resurrection in the way it's described in the Gospels.
really,
My question
so you're dismissing when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and you're dismissing the dead when the dead rose on Jerusalem when the curtain was torn.
He died after. Yeah, no, I mean, Lazarus died after, and everybody else.
After what? After what?
Well, he lived. It's not as though he lived forever, right? He's not like alive now. He still died again. After that. It's kind of like I'm a paramedic, and if we get like a resuscitation,
You are now
that person
officially,
dies.
I wish I had a crown to give you, as the king of post hoc rationalizations. You are dancing around, and every time I point to a problem with your belief, you just go on to something else. Oh, Jesus is the only person. Shut up. Shut up.
Okay, sure.
Jesus is the only person who experienced resurrection. What about Lazarus? What about the dead that rose in Jerusalem? Well, Jesus is the only one that experienced resurrection and stayed alive. So you have no existence. You have no evidence that Jesus existed. You have no evidence that he was killed. No good evidence. Sorry, I mean, of course you have anecdotal accounts in the Bible. You don't have good evidence that he was resurrected, and you don't have good evidence that he's still alive.
Well, I mean, you'd have to kind of define good evidence because, like, what kind
we
of
literally did that earlier.
Yeah.
did
We
actually.
literally
Been
did
there,
because
done
you're
that.
talking about
Basically, the
empirical
evidence that you're presenting is shit.
Well, according to you, but my question.
According
According
to reasonable standards of evidence, and also, by the way, according to you, because you don't believe people's testimonial accounts that they're being abducted by aliens, you are creating a special case scenario where you are accepting testimonial accounts that aren't firsthand, that you can't verify, for something that is more extraordinary than the claim that people are being abducted by aliens. You are the one with flawed standards of evidence, and this is obvious and demonstrable.
Well, if it was just out of curiosity, if it was the case, right, that somebody was being abducted by an alien, right, and I didn't witness it myself, it's not that I would automatically discount their testimony. I would have to see how did it affect their lives, what kind of corroborating evidence do they have, how many witnesses really were there, and are these witnesses consistent with what I should expect?
Have you bothered to look?
About the alien account, or in terms of the resurrection?
About the alien abductions? Have you bothered to investigate them?
No.
And yet you don't believe them.
Like, 'cause you guys,
and yet you don't believe them, and you're willing to dismiss them.
Out of hand. I mean, I just haven't looked at it. If you presented one that had the same...
I'm not here to try to convince you of this, because I don't believe they've been abducted by aliens. I don't believe they've been abducted by aliens either. See, one of us has good standards of evidence, and so is not believing these extraordinary claims. The other one has shitty standards of evidence, and so you're dismissing some extraordinary claims and believing more extraordinary claims.
Well, I'm not dismissing. I might have to take it on a claim-by-claim basis.
So,
just like you believe some news stories are not other news stories, I'd have to take it on a claim-by-claim.
These aren't news stories.
I know, but I'm just saying, in the same way that you would verify a certain news story and disbelieve it, or verify a news story and believe it.
Yeah. How do we verify the resurrection account?
Well, the resurrection account would be on eyewitness testimony.
You have no eyewitness
And
testimony.
obviously
Yeah, there are no eyewitness accounts of eyewitness accounts of the resurrection. Paul is not.
So Paul and James.
Paul is not an eyewitness to the resurrection. He claims to have witnessed the risen Jesus after
Jesus alive after he was dead.
Yeah, he's not a witness to the resurrection.
Not a witness to the resurrection.
Correct.
How can somebody witness Jesus alive after he was dead, but not be a witness to the resurrection?
They lie.
First of all, he didn't witness a bodily Jesus after the resurrection. If you want to go that route, you would be talking about the apostles that Jesus supposedly appeared to in a bodily form, where even doubting Thomas supposedly wanted to stick his fingers in the nail holes. But instead, you go to Paul. What about what?
James, the Lord's brother.
Okay, I have a story in a book that references that. I have no evidence beyond the story.
How much evidence would you expect beyond the story than what we have?
How much would I expect? Okay, that's a really good question. Because if there was a God who came down and took human form and sacrificed himself to serve as a loophole so that to save everybody, and expected people to accept this on good standards of evidence, then we wouldn't have anonymous hearsay accounts with no ability to verify it. That God should be smart enough to make sure that there is solid evidence to confirm the accounts, so that I can't poke holes in your thing the same way I poke holes in flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and other garbage beliefs.
So just out of curiosity, as it relates to that, like the standard of evidence and the things that you're asking, or the things that you were saying, are you suggesting that God should have multiple resurrections occur over the course of history?
It's fine to have just the one. It's fine to have just the one, but provide good evidence for it.
Later, when everybody can investigate it scientifically. Is that correct?
Wow.
I'm asking an honest question because I want to know. I mean, I
answered your question, but I'm going to let Drag do it.
So the issue here, I think it's maybe a better question. What would disabuse you of this belief? Hypothetically.
If you could find, I guess it would take, maybe like a hostile account saying that they actually witnessed Jesus not having died, like actually themselves, like a first-hand or second-hand, account that was.
Wait, so you're saying a report that somebody didn't die?
No, but I'm just saying in this situation, right, where they could demonstrably prove, it's something from the distant past, though. It's not really the same as something that can be investigated scientifically now. So what I'm trying to understand is, if you were to believe that a resurrection happened, it would have to happen now, and it would have to happen.
No. Stop, Matt. I did not. You keep stop and shut the fuck up for a second. When I say stop, just stop. You keep trying. I swear to God, you interrupt me one more time, and I'm going to hang up. You keep saying things like, you would expect it to need to happen now, and I've said no to that repeatedly. What Drag is asking you right now is, here we have an account, a biblical account, of a man who supposedly died and supposedly was resurrected. And you're accepting that account at face value, and he wants to know what would make you no longer accept that. And you come back with, oh, so you would expect it to happen now. No, give me, bye. Jesus. Give me the evidence for the account. And then to answer Drag's question, it would be, what would change your mind? What would convince you that you shouldn't believe this?
Right.
Because everything we've tried has failed. When we say, okay, do you believe in alien abductions? No. But they're more plausible, and by your own standards, the resurrection of Jesus is unique.
Right.
Alien abduction stories are not unique. So they don't require anything necessarily supernatural. By definition, they are vastly more probable or likely.
Yeah, it's weird how, his skepticism seemed to kick in when it involved aliens. Like, his personal credulity is really interesting. It's almost like there's a bias toward wanting to believe this particular narrative.
You'd think so. It's weird. So this guy, I actually recognize his questions because he emailed in sometime in the last week or so. And he thinks that he's calling in to trap us.
Does he?
Because his line of argument is, the sort of evidence that we would expect and accept to confirm a resurrection would render resurrections mundane. It would mean they would have to be occurring now all the time, and we would have to be able to investigate them. And if that's the case, then there's nothing unique or special about Jesus' resurrection because it would just be another one of many.
Okay.
And that our bias towards good evidence means that we could never confirm something in the past.
Yeah, see, there's so many issues with that. If I was, let's say, and I think we spoke about this, if I was a philosophical naturalist, I could see that being a problem. But as a methodological naturalist, right, I can still entertain ideas of the supernatural. I can still entertain the existence of things outside of the physical realm or whatever. But what I've yet to actually hear is a way to investigate supernatural claims, because he isn't unique in his arguments. It's just like, I believe this, other people believe this, and other people said it happened, so yeah, you should just kind of believe it. And it's not convincing, no matter how many mental gymnastics you need to do in order to get to that point. It still does not hold water.
It's funny that when you asked him, what would disabuse you of this belief?
Very simple question.
It's a simple question, not necessarily an easy question.
Fair enough.
Especially if you don't have a good understanding of epistemology or standards of evidence. How do you know what you know, and how is it reasonable? But he went to, well, if somebody would show me that he didn't die, which I immediately jumped in on, because I'm like, that's more miraculous, I would say, than the thing you're actually advocating. There's a guy who has never died. He's on 6th Street every night. I had a debate in Red Deer, Canada, and I asked my opponent. People keep wanting me to ask this in debates, and I don't always do it, but I did in this case. What would change his mind when it comes to the resurrection? And his answer was, well, if we found a tomb that had Jesus's body in it. And I loved that answer because it shows everything about how he's thinking, and caller Matt is thinking exactly the same way.
Right.
Because, first of all, you are presuming that Jesus actually existed, and mythicists are going to challenge you on that, and you have no way to demonstrate that he did. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm fine with the notion that there may have been a Yeshua ben Joseph who was an itinerant rabbi who said some things and maybe got killed. None of that's extraordinary. But you're beginning with, he definitely existed, and so if we were to find his tomb, that would mean he did not resurrect. Except, how would you ever verify that you found that particular Yeshua's tomb?
Right.
And it's not like we have DNA to verify. And this is why it's especially strange that if there's a God who wants people to believe this, why did he do it 2,000 years ago when we didn't have any ability to record anything, any ability to investigate, as far as DNA and all this other why not do it now?
Right.
Or maybe 100 years in the future when we have even better investigative methods?
Yeah.
Why is it that miracles drop off as our ability to investigate them increases? That seems rather strange to me.
It's really strange.
Vern actually shared a meme the other day that I loved, which is like, it's going along miracle claims, and then the invention or the discovery of scientific methods, and then it declines, and it goes along here at 0, and then photography, and it jumps back up, and then Photoshop, and it drops back off. It's
weird correlation there.
Or something along those lines. But yeah. And so the guy that I was debating in Red Deer, yeah, you don't have the ability to test to determine that body. But he set up a scenario that is unfalsifiable. And that means that he set up a scenario where the only thing that will change his mind is something that can never happen. And Matt's doing the same thing, because Matt is essentially saying, I'm going to believe this until you prove me wrong. And it almost doesn't even matter whether or not there's a way to prove him wrong or not. That's already a mistake. Yeah. To say, I'm going to believe this. And what he said at one point, which we didn't really get into, was he's like, well, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And you're correct. We're not saying that this dearth of evidence means it didn't happen. We're saying that the absence of all this evidence means we cannot be rationally justified in claiming or accepting that it has. I don't need to claim Jesus wasn't resurrected. I don't need to prove it. I don't even need to believe it. My position is, I'm not convinced that he was.
All right. How do we investigate any of these things? And so I've yet to have any type of metric where a theist has offered for me to investigate supernatural claims. So maybe there's a supernatural, I think there's a meme, but supernatural methodology or something. I don't know. Like I open that up for them to I guess, contrive at some point in time. But I think we need a palate cleanser after that.
All right, where are we going now?
Gregory, that seems interesting.
Are you sure you don't want to go line 2?
Yeah.
All right, Gregory in Boston, thanks for waiting. You're on with Dragnaught and Matt.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Dragnaught. Thanks for having me.
Hey.
Sure.
So I'll just kind of get right to it. So I was raised a Christian, indoctrinated at a young age. I was a Christian for 30 years, and I'm 31 years old. I recently sort of switched to atheism, but more recently, in the last few months, I've been sort of reconnecting with some of my old ilk, some of my old Christian colleagues, friends, social groups, and well, I don't know. It's been tough. I'm kind of on the fence again, and I was calling in to see if I could get some advice for clarity, maybe, specifically, some of the conversations I was having with those people it felt, I had a strong feeling I was being dragged back in again to Christianity, or that I had a strong desire to go there again. But it really does contrast with what my standard of evidence. So,
So what's is the appeal evidential or emotional or something else?
Oh man, I think it's emotional, Matt. I mean, I had a kind of I've had a unique perspective on this for a long time because I was raised in a Christian high school. My whole high school, my father was my biological sciences teacher, my physical sciences teacher, my algebra teacher. So the science teacher was in the house the whole time. So the contradictions between what science tells us about the world around us versus what the Bible tells us and Christianity tells us about the world around us, those contradictions, like these long lists of contradictions, even though I was indoctrinated at a very young age, they were at the forefront of my mind for 30 years. But I never wavered until this past year. And listening to your show and talking even in a few other shows and then really kind of sitting down and getting self-honest with myself, I felt solid in my atheism for the first time, and I felt two contrasting emotions at the same time. One, liberation from all the, sort of the other aspects of Christianity that are bad, like hypocrisy and all that stuff and judgmental behavior. And I felt liberated from all that, but also terrified in that I'm throwing away this worldview that I've had for 30 years, where I realized that everything I thought was true for 30 years is probably not. And I thought I would just take the one contradiction between science and Christianity that bothers me the most and kind of has me on the fence after what I was talking to my Christian friends about. And it's really the age of the earth. Young earth creationism versus 4.6 billion years. And they had brought up an argument to me that it was new to me. I don't know if it's a new argument, but it's basically saying that what if God created the earth with age intact, right? In that the book of Genesis, what it calls a day, might not be a 24-hour day. It could be much longer than that. And depending on how long a day is in Genesis, it could comport with 4.6 billion years.
Okay, hang on.
And as I say that sounds really dumb.
Yeah. Here's the thing. So there are a number of different creation models. There's a literal 6-day creationism that's tied to a young earth, but then there's also day-age creationism where what you're talking about is when the Bible says on the first day, it means some undefined age thing. The reason day-age creationism exists is because people started finding out that this stuff isn't right in accordance with what we understand about with science.
Right.
And so they've tried to find a way to make it okay.
Try to reconcile it, basically.
Yeah, it is day-age creationism is retcon.
Yes.
It is an attempt to rework Genesis to make it more compatible with science. But I would recommend that you Google index to creationist claims, and specifically when you find the list, one of those will be about the order of events in Genesis, because it doesn't matter whether there's a day or an age. The order of events is also incompatible with scientific understanding of what's happened. So you can go to day-age. What's that?
I was just saying, I see. Okay, I had never considered that, but the order
but
of
in any
events
case,
doesn't comport.
even if they were in the same order, what you're trying to do is find a way to hang on to something when your religion, when you find that it conflicts with science. Why would you do that? If it were true, nobody would have to find a way to massage it into seeming less bullshitty.
Yeah, and I think one of the main reasons I ended up in atheism about a year ago or so was because I was looking at the arguments on either side, and I stopped looking at the arguments themselves. I started looking at the anatomy of the argument, and on the Christian side, like all the Christian arguments had this one attribute of like they're going out and finding evidence to support the conclusion that not only have they already arrived at it, but they already really want it to be true, and the other side didn't have any argument that fit that attribute. And having talked this through, I guess I'm realizing what kind of had me on the fence kind of fell into that same category of I guess what you would call neo-evidence, going out and finding, instead of using evidence as a guiding thing, like a guiding star to get you to a conclusion that you have not arrived at yet.
Well, how about this? Do you, I guess, during your time as a Christian, did you take Genesis literally? Like Adam was literally created out of the afar? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and this wasn't like indoctrination from people that my family knew. This was my uncle's church. He was a pastor. My Sunday school was taught by either my mother or my aunt.
They all taught that?
My dad was my science teacher. Like, this was my family.
Okay, so check this out.
It was gospel to me.
Check this out. So if you actually translate the word afar, it means dust from the ground, literally. If we're talking about the Garden of Eden, we're talking about a deity somehow physically picking up dirt, which is largely silicon dioxide, right? 90% of the Earth's surface, the crust, is silicon dioxide. That's silicone and oxygen, right? There's a bit of an issue if you create a person out of that. You do know that we're carbon-based, right, and not silicone-based?
Carbon-based life, yeah. Yep. Yeah,
big issue there.
So in order to reconcile that, you have to say, well, God can turn the silicon into carbon. Magic. Yeah. You have no path through any of this. And look at all of it. I mean, it came up on the stream yesterday when we were talking about Noah's Ark and the rainbow. The rainbow is God's message that it promises he'll never destroy the earth by flood again. He'll destroy it in other ways, but I'm just not going to drown people.
No water genocide, yay.
And so the question then becomes, did the rainbow exist prior to the end of the flood, or did God just create the rainbow then? Because if God created the rainbow then that means that everything we understand about physics and light was fundamentally different prior to the flood. Now,
light refraction, yeah.
Yeah, does that mean that, but if a rainbow existed prior to the flood, how can it be God's promise that he's not going to flood the earth? Because then the promise would have been there the first time it rained, and it would have been there after the flood, and it's just after this is what theists are doing. After the flood's over, they say, there's a rainbow. That's God's promise that he's not going to flood us again. Well, what the fuck did the rainbow mean, right before we headed off on this adventure with all these animals?
It was a warning.
Yeah, it was the warning. It was like, rainbow means I'm going to flood you, I'm going to flood you, I'm going to flood you, I'm never going to flood you again.
That'll learn them.
You can put your life vests up.
Yeah, that seems silly. Okay, well, I had actually one other question that had more to do with sort of all the immoral things that this character does in the Bible, this God character, and it's hard for you to even say it that way, this God character. Okay, but anyway, I was talking to my family about this, and how do you guys reconcile Exodus 21, for example? Matt, I know you have your history with people on the slavery issue, and I know you're sick of it. I don't need to bring it up. I had this conversation with them, and through your frustration, they ended up defending what's in there, and I can't believe that. You know what I mean? As much trouble as I'm having myself internally, I can't believe that. I can't believe, even if it was real, I don't know if I could even worship this thing. You know what I mean? But yet my family, the people closest to me, are
So here's
defending things and horrible, horrible things. And why does this God character get a pass if it's something you wouldn't do yourself? I don't.
Yeah, well, because he's God, he's above the law. Mm-hmm. So you already addressed this when you said that they lead the evidence towards their foregone conclusion. This is exactly what's happening. They can't acknowledge that the Bible might be wrong or might be mistaken or might be morally bankrupt because it can't be, because they've already reached the conclusion that it's the product of a good and just God. And so they have to, in some way, twist themselves into a knot to say, well, there must be some explanation under which this is moral. They're at least being consistent. It's the ones that start to depart from that consistency, the ones that are trying to massage the day age stuff. Mm. It's the gay-friendly churches who are like, well, yes, it says if a man lies with another man, but it seems to be okay with lesbians. And, when we get into the New Testament, Jesus is saying all this stuff about, love your brother. And maybe Jesus was a little bit gay, because there was the disciple that Jesus loved. And so let me cherry pick out all this stuff until it fits what I want it to be. And this is why, while I despise their beliefs, I at least have a modicum more respect for the fundamentalist literalists than I do for the people who are like Matt, who called in. He's going to discount alien abduction stories without doing any investigation and accept a resurrection story that he can't investigate. He probably isn't a bad guy. He's probably not going to accept the passages on slavery. Nope. He's probably not going to be exceptionally misogynistic, but he's probably going to be quite a bit more patriarchal than some of the rest of us would be. People make up their own minds about what God wants. God seems to always agree with them.
It's crazy how that works out.
It's amazing. And that's why there's a First Baptist Church and a Second Baptist Church and a Free Will Baptist Church and a Liberty Baptist Church and an Independent Baptist Church and a Bible Baptist Church. And that's just a handful of the Baptist ones.
You made those up.
I did not make those up.
No, there's a lot more than that, too.
Yeah. I didn't even get started on the Baptist churches. Well. Plus, then you've got the Southern Baptist Convention.
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
They run the sundown towns.
Yes.
Okay. People are Googling that. What the hell is a sundown town?
Yeah. Go Google sundown town. But do it after the show because, Craig, we're going to move on. I want to make sure.
Yeah,
you're going to struggle with this stuff. You're going to struggle with this stuff for a while. And the question I asked at the outset is whether or not this was evidential or emotional. I pretty much could have predicted the answer, and I'm glad that you were honest about it and that you're honestly searching through stuff.
Yeah.
Emotions are great. Emotions are what drive us to be empathetic.
Makes us human.
It's what we use to form relationships with people. It is the thing that brings joy to life. It is not what we should be basing our evidence-based questions on. You want to get emotional about whether chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla ice cream? Cool. You want to get emotional about whether or not the earth is flat? You have made a category error in your assessment of what type of question is this. And the same thing applies to, is there a God? And when what's going to happen to you is at some point, you're going to end up talking to somebody like one of our previous callers, and they're going to say, well, it's an article of faith. You can't test God. You can't put God in a beaker. You can't do all these things. That's not the fault of science, and it doesn't change what counts as good epistemology. If there was a God, and that God is smarter than all of us, he should fundamentally understand the nature of evidence, the nature of epistemology, of what sort of evidence should be required in order for us to consider something as a reasonable belief, and then could only create a world where that sort of evidence is provided for the things that he expects you to believe. If a God expects you to believe something based on bad evidence, and he's the one that put you here and set up the rules by which standards of evidence are good or bad, then that God is an idiot or corrupt and immoral. It's just like you couldn't punish, if you never told your kid what the rules are, how could you possibly hold them responsible for breaking the rules? And if you know that your kid cannot understand something, how grotesque would you be to punish them for not understanding something that you know they are incapable of understanding?
Not only that, but in punishing them infinitely for a finite thing. I mean, if your kid took a cookie out of a cookie jar, you wouldn't chain him in the basement and torture him forever.
Well,
right?
I would, but that's why I don't have that. Because those cookies are fucking mine. Lay your hand on my cookies.
Thanks to both of you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
Made me feel warm inside.
Warm and fuzzy. Well, it's nice because, there's going to be a mix of calls, and there's a couple here that we're going to get to shortly.
I'm picking number 6 just to piss you off.
You're picking 6 right now? I haven't even looked at what 6 is. We'll go to it. James in North Carolina. I'm getting an echo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was curious. I'm an atheist. I assume, by definition, you guys obviously favor science. I was wondering how you guys felt about scientists who are blackballed by the science community for having observations that aren't consistent with what would be considered socially acceptable nowadays. Specifically, James Watson, who discovered DNA.
Okay, so I think you're referring to some of the social gaffes that he has made about certain groups of people, particularly women. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about his observations on race.
Okay, so he's
Who are we talking about? Watson
and Crick.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to double check because there are others who have similar observations.
Right. So his work is instrumental to our understanding of molecular biology and genetics, and it will go down, and it's still a fundamental aspect of learning for any person studying the topic. But him being regarded as someone of merit only extends to his academic achievements. And so if he's saying crazy shit that is not scientific, then guess what? You're going to be relegated.
So you're saying that it's not scientific what he said about the differences between races?
They're like, specifically what?
Well, that there's differences whatsoever.
Now, there's differences between people, right? But the conclusions that some people try to draw as far as the biology of races only goes so far, right? Because I can say there's a difference between me and my brothers, right? But if you're trying to group it together all African Americans, well, that's erroneous, right? Because we're not one homogenous group.
The grouping, the process of deciding who fits into what particular category is where I think...
And who determines that?
Well...
Genetics.
But we can define things however we want. We can say, okay, we're only going to look at people with beards or who can grow a full beard. And I'm looking at a wonderful full beard out in the audience that, puts mine to shame because mine will only get maybe 2 inches longer than this and it's done.
It's Santa Claus.
So we draw that circle and then we can discuss what things they have in common and what things they don't have in common. And so obviously I'm sitting here with Drag and there's a difference in melanin in our skin.
Right.
There's a difference in hair type. And so you could draw us in two different circles and talk about those things and who we have more in common with. But it's also easy to put us in the same circle as males in the, I'm assuming, in the 21st century, trace our genetic heritage back and find out where we have differences. And if we are 99 point, whatever percent identical, 99.9967324, I think it is.
Close enough.
I'm just making that number up. The point is that even if you were to find, let's say we were going to say women are smarter than men. Just we've figured it out. Women are just generally smarter than men. So what? Because the difference that we're talking about there, if there were to be one, isn't particularly significant and doesn't enlighten us on anything. So I'm not familiar with what Watson said with regard to race. I'm probably heard about it at some point. We lost the caller. No wonder I'm not getting interrupted.
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Do you know what he said?
Yeah, I know what he's talking about. There was actually my seminar in biology course went over some of those things, and I particularly remember some statements about Photo 51, and I just forgot her name too. Doggone it, someone knows who I'm talking about. But they went in on this woman, and she was not fairly characterized as far as her demeanor, and people didn't want to work with her because of their perception that, she's ice queen, this, that, and the other. But I mean, this is, 60-something years ago almost. So,
sure.
That sort of stuff, looking back, that's not acceptable, it's not professional, and that should have no place in any business or any lab or whatever. And so folks are upset because they feel that, this guy or that guy should not be looked down upon because he has this particular view, which, granted, I kind of see the point that just because someone disagrees with you, but when some of these views are actually harmful to society, and they're just generalizations and they're not actually reflective of reality, then guess what? You know what? Not all your beliefs everyone's going to be cool with.
Yeah, I mean, he called in to say that I'm discounting, science.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. If he didn't understand that group white guys are not a homogenous group. African Americans are not a homogenous group. If he doesn't know that, he might want to go back to biology class.
Yeah, this is one of those things where, and I don't think this will catch anybody particularly by surprise. I am fine with discussing things within the context in which they are currently being discussed. So, for example, I'm fine with the notion that race is predominantly a social construct, that the things that unite us are far greater than the things that divide us, and the distinctions we're talking about, how much melanin in somebody's skin or what your particular lineage is. It's incredibly difficult. It's not all African Americans a homogenous group, but all people with a certain skin tone aren't even a homogenous group. They're from all over and everything else. And what people want to do is we want to be lazy. We want to be able to take anybody and anything and put them into a convenient bucket so that we can pretend that we understand the sum total of what makes them them. And so it's very easy to say, hey, I watched the Atheist Experience today and there was a white guy on with a black guy. Because that's the buckets we want to put people into.
Yeah.
Because it allows us to dismiss people. It allows us to pretend like we know and understand people. I'm not going to do the absolutely monumentally ignorant thing of saying, I don't see race. Anthony Penn will clarify that over and over again.
Do not say that, people.
You absolutely do see race. It's absurd. You see differences between people. It's when you go through those classifications, how you want to use them and what conclusions you reach, that's where the problem is. Because if there's anybody out there who thinks that I'm not eclipsed on scientific knowledge sitting here today, you not only need to go back to biology class, you should probably just stop talking for a while and read a few dozen books. Where are we going next?
A valued customer. I like that name.
Ooh, going valued customer in the Midwest. Thank you, valued customer. How can we help you today?
Hey, Matt. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey, I was just calling in today. It's the first time I called in. But we are closeted atheists here in a community that we would not be able to come out in.
Sure.
And so my wife and I were the same, kind of on the same journey. But we are raising our kids in the church. And sorry, I'm a little bit nervous here.
No, you don't have to be nervous. And I've answered this issue 100 times, so I'm going to let Drag do it.
Yay.
Yeah. So we're raising them in the church, but now as they're getting older, I'm having, my son's 8 and 5. We're kind of having a fear that they're going to kind of out us unintentionally, So we're just kind of, I don't know. We're just hoping that we're just kind of telling them that we're all going to church. This is our tradition. This is what we do. We're always open to having conversations, and we tell them other people believe other things. But it's just hard when they make, I don't know. We're just afraid sometimes.
You are in a terrible situation.
Yeah. So there's a few ways to handle this. This is actually very funny. Back when I was on the Magic Sandwich Show, this is a question that similar to the question that I asked Arn, but now I get to give information to you. So you're paying it forward. So I would just make sure that you are educating your kids in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Make sure that they are educated in it, but also give them the tools and teach them how to ask questions. Teach them skepticism. They're not going to intentionally try to get you in trouble. They may inadvertently say something, but any good believer can say that, you know what, I like to investigate all the claims. And that if there's any questions in your local area, hey, why aren't you attending churches? You know what? Wife's not feeling good. We're still searching for a church. There's all types of,
Well, they're going to church.
Yeah, they're still, okay.
He's afraid that the kids are going to say something at church that's going to out the fact that they're non-believers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. As they get older here, they're, it was easy when they were young.
Yeah,
but,
you're going to have to talk.
Older.
You're going to have to talk to them about that. But you do have options in that. Look, the kids are inquisitive. They understand certain things. I don't envy your situation because you are voluntarily lying. You are committing yourself to living a lie in a long-term situation. What you probably need to talk to is someone who was gay and closeted for ages, and how they dealt with lying to anyone and everyone about this, because it's at least from what I've heard, it's at least similar in the and I'm getting nods from one of my friends in the audience. It's at least similar to the emotional trauma that you have to go through. At some point, you're going to have to make a decision of whether or not you want your kids to keep having to do this, and whether or not it's worth it to coach your kids to lie on your behalf. And I get it. You're in a situation where there may not be any other option. And I've told people, if you're in a situation like that, lie your happy little ass off. Because if coming out is going to jeopardize your health or security or job or any of that stuff, you're better off lying. But it ain't going to be easy.
I hate saying that though, but it's it's true. Like, just focus on building cover. But I would say personally, extricate yourself and your family and come to Austin. It's great here.
And I fully realize that the best thing to do would be to move somewhere else, do something different.
It's not always an option.
Live opening, but it's totally not an option. And, I don't want to make it sound like I'm important or anything, but kind of the status I have in the community.
I have a solution.
There's nothing I can do.
I have a solution. You and your spouse can keep going and lying, and don't make the kids go anymore. And if people ask, hey, why aren't you putting your kids in church? You can say, well, we've had issues with them when they come to church, and we just don't think they're necessarily ready for it. They've been taught some things. We're going to continue teaching them things, and we're going to allow them to make up their own mind and do more of what they want to do. And now you're being slightly more honest. Your kids aren't going to out you, and they're also not having to sit through bullshit stories of Noah and the ark.
Oh, yeah, that's not something that I don't know if that's necessarily an option either, as we've been going, but
people would notice if you guys just stopped.
Well,
you can keep going.
Yeah, but it's man, we're not like lost in the crowd. This isn't a big church. It's it's like, oh man.
Yeah. I didn't say it was a good solution. I said it was a solution. I don't think you have a good solution.
Yeah.
You are between a rock and a hard place.
Make everyone else an atheist. I think that'd be easier.
That's what we're trying to do, is change the world around you so that your problem goes away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my hope is that both my wife and I were raised Christians. My hope is that, and I think that everyone around me as they were raising us was legitimate about their belief. But my hope is that, hearing both sides of the story, they'll come to a logical conclusion down the road when they're older. Because we searched and searched and searched, and we only decided that it was okay for ourselves, that this was an okay thing to actually not believe in.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
How many people are at your church on average on Sunday?
30.
23?
30.
33
or so.
Yeah. What if 20 of them are doing the exact same thing you're doing?
Oh, that's one of my theories. I'm under the sometimes assumption that everyone thinks this is bullshit, but they're all trying to keep up appearances, because that's what I did for the first 30 years of my life.
Churches are full of people who are doing what you're doing. Now, I'm not going to say what percentage it is or what the majority is. We know that there are pastors who are doing what you're doing because we know about the Clergy Project. There are active clergy people who don't believe, who are stuck in a job that they can't get out of. And so we created a community for them to talk. I would recommend, as I always do, that you contact Recovering from Religion. There, you can go to the website. You can call in to the helpline. You can engage in chat services there. We also have a Discord. There may be other people on our Discord channel who are in similar situations. Getting to talk to some of those people, you can also, if there's 30 some odd people there at your church, you can gradually express doubts to people about portions of doctrine, and kind of feel them out and see where they are. And then you might be able to suss out how many of them are going along to get along.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing too is, I've been watching, and I just swore that I would be an observer of the show for the rest of my days. And I just had to call in today. But my other, my 8-year-old I'm watching these shows and he's asking questions about, what's that show about and all this stuff. And I'm having to answer some real hard questions.
Just tell him Roblox.
Yeah. He plays that game.
My son too. So I know about it.
So, yeah, so that's where I'm at. But I really honestly appreciate the opportunity to be able to reach out and, talk to somebody. I'm glad that I have my wife, with me on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
That would be infinitely harder.
Yeah.
If I was just on my own, in my own household as a prisoner, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. And there are people who are in that situation. So you got it better than some people, even though you got it bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, if you figure something out, if you make some changes, if you make some discoveries, whatever else, by all means, call us back and let us know. I can't promise that we could ever be any more help than we were today. And I definitely would encourage you to reach out to Recovering from Religion. If for no other reason than they can often put you in touch with, resources and communities. And they're probably going to have dealt with this even more than I have.
Yeah. And I mean, this is, it's like nobody knows. It's insane.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thanks, man.
For calling.
Okay, Matt. You guys really appreciate taking my call, and you guys have a good one.
You too, man.
Best of luck. That's tough.
I've been in a similar situation where I've had to kind of hide my non-belief, and that was back when I was living with my parents after Hurricane Katrina, and I don't have any resources other than family, and they're all Christians, and so it's like, gotta kind of play the game until I moved out. And so my mother slowly found out after I started posting things on social media. So yeah, she's like, it's just a phase. No.
How's that working out?
She actually joined me on a stream before we came up here, and so she knows she's a subscriber to my YouTube channel, and she knows that I'm out. She knows I'm doing this, and she,
Hi, Mom.
So it's
Don't hate me.
She enjoys that I am open about what I believe and what I don't believe. She just wants me to be honest, to be true to myself, and to me to obviously she wants me to be a Christian and she prays for me, but she's not belligerent about it at all.
Yeah. There are a number of parents who are. I've had back and forth with my parents, and
I've heard.
One of the things that my dad pointed out at one time is, "Hey, man, it's your life. God gave you free will. If you want to go to hell, that's your choice, and it's not something He has to actually worry about." So there's been the passive aggressive thing. Mm-hmm. I also know that my parents are proud of me to some extent. They're not proud that, from their perspective, I'm actively leading people to hell. They are proud of me, because they know that I'm a decent person. Mm-hmm. And they know I'm doing something that I love, and they know that I hope they know that I'm being sincere, especially after we've had conversations about it.
Right.
That's a difficult position to be in, and that's why for years I cut them quite a lot of slack right up until the birthday card.
Yeah, I heard about that event.
And that's where I was like, okay, I've given you this much rope, I just can't.
Yeah, it's even.
And I think that our caller is going to be in a similar situation at some point. It's normal for human beings to hide their aspects of their true self from other people. Almost everybody does this. We do it when we first meet someone, because we'd like for them to like us, and we'd like to find out whether or not we're going to get along. So you gradually dole out the little pieces of your debauchery or whatever else it is. And it's like, and then what ends up happening is that if you're in relationships that are compatible, either it becomes a non-issue, or you find out that you're similar in some way. Mm-hmm. You know, your kink's not my kink, but your kink's fine. Or your kink is my kink, and let's go have fun. And not just with respect to kinks, but we do that. That's normal. What's not healthy is living a lengthy, grand lie to anyone and everyone around you. Because now you have nobody that you can connect with who knows who you actually are.
No, because you're putting up this facade. You're walking around on eggshells so that no one figures out.
Because you don't want to be alone.
Yeah.
You're terrified that people aren't going to like you for who you are. And all I can tell you is that the people who truly know who I am, most of them are still okay with me. Or, you know, they like me with some regard.
Yeah.
Some of them don't. I don't really miss the ones that ended the relationship, because now I have relationships with people who appreciate me for me.
Not who they think you are.
Right. I don't have to put up a facade ever. I found my brand. I got my network. I got my people. We're all here. And it's some of the people on the other side of the glass. And there's probably some of the people on the other side of the glass here today who are like, yeah, I'm here because Dragnaught and the rest of the community, that Matt's an ass and I don't want anything to do with him. Cool. I appreciate the fact that at least if they're going to be dismissive towards me, that maybe they're doing it because they genuinely know who I am.
Right.
I'd rather have someone hate me for who I truly am than hate me for who they heard I was. And I'd rather have somebody love me for who I truly am than love me for who they think I am.
Facts B.
Where are we going next?
All right. This person's been waiting forever. A radical?
Here we go. Line 4. A radical. You are on with Matt and Dragnaught.
Hi, Matt, and hi, Dragnaught.
Hi.
Did I say that last name right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so normally they ask whether or not someone's a theist or a non-theist, and you're listed as neither.
Right.
That's not possible. So I'm gonna short circuit this right off the bat. Are you actually convinced that a God, any God, is real?
I do believe that there's a mind behind reality, yes.
So you're convinced that there is some God thing?
Yes, and if given the chance,
Okay.
I'd like to prove that to you.
Then you're a theist. I don't know why you would say neither, but okay, go ahead.
Okay. To make this a fair conversation, I just want to point out a couple things. Being that this is a type of mini debate and you are on the side of being an atheist, that there is no God or that there's no evidence that there's a God.
I'm not convinced there's a God.
Right. You are going to be entrenched in the position that there is no God.
I just said I'm not convinced there is a God. That is not the same as I am convinced there is no God.
Okay, so you're saying that you are open to evidence that would change your mind on that?
I am. Are you?
Yes, I am. I hold my
we
claim
are both
provisionally.
open to being convinced there's God. So what you would need to do is define the God and then provide the evidence for that God.
Okay. In terms of there being a God, I would say that God is an entity that is conscious and deliberately created the cosmos and everything within it.
Okay.
That is my definition for God.
Are there any other characteristics other than a conscious creator of the cosmos?
No, I don't
Okay,
think so.
cool. What evidence can you provide that supports the conclusion that there's a conscious creator of the cosmos? Which I love the alliteration on, so cool.
Okay. In terms of there being empirical evidence, not all truths are empirical in reality. Would you agree to that? Hello?
Do you have an example of something that we would accept as true that you can't provide empirical evidence for? I mean, there are things that are true, but they're sort of esoteric. Like, it's true that that this is one of my favorite songs. It's true that that's the case, but it's not something I can provide empirical evidence for. But it doesn't matter because it's still esoteric. It's still my subjective assessment. So I'm not aware, maybe I'm not thinking of it clearly. Is there an objective truth for which we can't provide empirical evidence?
Right. That's what I'm saying, that there are truths that exist.
What's an example?
That I don't have one right off of my head.
And I can't come up with one either. So, but it seems like what you're doing is saying that there's a conscious creator of the universe, and that this is true, but we're not going to have empirical evidence for it. Is that what you were trying to do?
That is what I'm trying to say.
I don't understand how anyone could be convinced reasonably that there is a conscious creator of the universe without empirical evidence. And when you say that this is the sort of thing that you can't provide empirical evidence for, what kind of evidence can you provide?
Okay, the evidence that I would be providing would be within reason. Philosophical.
That doesn't mean anything.
Within reason?
Of course, we're looking for something that's within reason. I asked for what type of evidence other than empirical are you going to provide?
Well, I guess there would be like syllogisms.
Syllogisms are logical arguments, but they are only sound if the premises are accepted as true. And so, depending on what your premises are, you would need to provide empirical evidence for those. Like, what's premise one?
Okay.
What's premise one?
The fact, I'm about to say it.
Okay.
The fact that there are evolutionary adaptive advantages that creatures have.
Okay, first of all, that's not a premise. So if you're going to say syllogism, you ought to know how to construct one. And what you would need are two premises that lead to a conclusion where your major and minor premises are linked. It's not the fact that there are evolutionary adaptations. But we can continue doing this in a non-structured thing, especially since Drag's here. So we're starting with premise one, being that it is a fact that there are evolutionary advantageous evolutionary changes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's your loose first premise. Keep going.
Okay, actually, that was like my first thing leading in the evidence.
Okay, but hang on. Would you and I agree it is a fact that there are advantageous evolutionary changes?
Yes.
Yep, we're in agreement with that.
Okay. Would you also agree that we did not will ourselves those evolutionary adaptive advantages?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can't just imagine yourself producing a stronger.
There's no reason to think that any change in allele frequency over time or any evolutionary change is subject to any will at all.
Okay. Well, the fact
be careful when you say okay to that, because that just short circuits exactly where you're going.
Okay. Well, each creature being perfectly adapted for their particular environment.
No.
Something, and that's an intelligent feature.
I don't think you heard us, because as soon as you said each creature is perfectly adapted to their environment, both of us immediately said no, because that's not what evolution says. It says nothing about perfect adaptation.
How would you even establish that?
Let's remove the word perfect. Each creature is well adapted to their environment.
You couldn't even make that determination. That depends on the environment. That depends on the time of year. That depends on the organism. That depends on a lot of factors, my man.
And the ones that aren't particularly well adapted to the environment, those are the ones that go extinct, because you seem to be looking at it on a creature by creature basis, but evolution affects populations, not individuals.
Bingo.
Okay. Birds having wings. Is that an evolutionary advantage?
It is both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's all contextual. It depends on the situation. If they're being chased by a predator on the ground and the wings allow them to fly up, then yes, that's an advantage in that situation. If they're not being chased by a predator on the ground, but they're being chased by a faster predator that's in the air, then it may be a disadvantage. If their wings being hollow fundamentally changes how much they're able to move and how they have to get food, and the weather changes, that can be a disadvantage. You can't look at a trait and say, this is an advantage. Is intelligence an advantage? In some situations it is, and in some situations it may not be. This is fundamentally not how evolution works. And it's a wrong way to look at the situation, saying, here is a trait, this is an advantage.
Okay. Sticking with the bird example for a second. Birds have very good eyesight to spot prey on the ground.
Some birds do, some don't.
Would we say most birds do?
I wouldn't even be able to say that, honestly. I'm not an ornithologist.
Let's just pick a bird, a hawk.
Yeah.
We'd say hawk.
All right, let's go.
Hawks have better eyesight.
Let's go with a bird of prey.
Hawk.
Sure.
Birds of prey have good eyesight.
Okay. Good is a Weasley term. You can't even necessarily say better for eyesight.
In relation to us.
You still can't say better, because what is better? Do they see farther?
They can see further than we do.
They can see further than we can do, but do they see as much of a visual spectrum as we do? Are they able to distinguish color greater than we are? So see what I'm saying? You can't just go with eyesight.
In terms of vision and distance, birds have a better eyesight.
Can a hawk see farther than me? Yes.
All right, and I'm saying that would be not be to be viewing prey from the ground, but from the sky, which would go back to the wings. But in any case, all right, the second piece of evidence I have is the fact that the reason for death is an intelligent one.
Whoa.
There was overpopulation.
Whoa. So we're still trying to get to a conscious creator of the cosmos. You just said the reason for death is an intelligent one, and I'm not being obtuse. I don't know what the hell you mean.
Okay, I can explain it for you. If there is no death, there would be overpopulation of species.
No, that's not necessarily true.
Your body could just, get teleported to a different dimension. I mean, there's all types of stuff that could happen.
You could just stop having sex.
Yeah, we could reach a population cap and then everyone's genitals would stop working.
Hold on. If there was no death,
you could just have nothing but gay sex and there would be no overpopulation.
Wouldn't be so bad.
People would be still having sex.
What I just said, you could have nothing but homosexual sex and there would be no overpopulation.
But we would.
Yeah, but
we have heterosexual.
Sorry.
Why are we?
Bad joke. Keep going.
Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. Is this like a serious program, or are you just like interrupting me every 5 seconds?
If you would say so, we're interrupting you to clarify all the ways you are thinking about this in the wrong way.
Right. No, and I'm trying to speak, and you're like cutting me off before I even get to say what my thing is.
You said something that needed clarification or correction, so we did that.
Okay. If I'm saying that if there was no death, there would be overpopulation of species.
And we say, no, that's not true.
Heterosexual how can it not be true if there would still be reproduction?
I just explained to you that you could have no death and everybody could be having gay sex, and now there's not overpopulation.
Or you could also have no death and everyone still be having heterosexual sex.
Yes.
And there would be an overpopulation.
You are absolutely correct. My objection was that you said your statement suggested that there would necessarily be overpopulation, and I was pointing out that that's not necessarily true. In the same way that when you talk about eyesight, you say your implication is that this is necessarily better when it's actually contextual. It is actually based on the situation. You are making broad-based generalizations when you need to be more precise. How on earth are we getting to, therefore, there is a conscious creator of the cosmos?
Well, I'm trying to get to that. If
you're failing to get to that. You've made
that's because you're helping me fail to it.
Yes, I'm helping you fail. I'm pointing out where you're failing. You have made mistake after mistake after mistake. Not one of your premises, as loose as they are, has been sound. And so if you can't come up with a sound premise, then you have no argument.
Sir, I am trying to make an argument. You keep interrupting it.
You are trying to make an argument, and you are failing because every point of your argument is flawed. You can't add up a whole bunch of flaws and get to, therefore, there's a conscious creator of the cosmos.
If everything was, all other considerations were the same, and there was no death, if everything else in life was still playing out in life, the way that it does, and there was no death, there would be overpopulation. Could we agree to that?
No.
How would that be wrong?
Because we may advance enough to move off of this planet and go populate elsewhere and keep spreading.
I just said if everything else stayed the same as it was now.
Okay,
we aren't off the planet.
Why would I accept your ridiculous hypothetical that nothing would change?
Why is it ridiculous? Because you say it's ridiculous?
Yes, it's ridiculous because I say it's ridiculous.
You're not the judge and jury of intelligence.
I'm the judge and jury of what I find ridiculous. You bet I am. And when I explain it to you...
That's subjective, is it not? Is it not subjective?
Yes, it is. And when I explain to you why it's ridiculous, then we all get to determine whether or not you are being reasonable in determining what's ridiculous. Because what you want to do is say, if nothing else changes. When the question here is, you said death is intelligent.
No, I said the reason for death is intelligent.
Right.
The reason for death.
But what is the reason for death? What is the reason for death?
The reason for death is to prevent overpopulation.
No, that's an assumption. That's an assumption on your part. You are reaching a conclusion and not providing any evidence that.
Okay, let's move on.
No, we're not moving on. Let me finish here. You are asserting that death exists specifically to avoid overpopulation, and you would like to say that this is necessarily an intelligent decision. That is not necessarily why death exists. And even if death exists in part or in whole to curb overpopulation, there's no demonstration that this was an intelligent decision. This could be the natural order of when a population gets to a certain size, it can no longer sustain itself, and death is what happens.
Wouldn't that be an intelligent prerequisite?
No.
I'm still
it's sure not a stupid one.
So,
oh my God.
So I'm still always confused about these intelligence arguments. I have yet to see or experience or know about an intelligence that lacks a substrate. Do you get what I'm saying?
Okay, the substrate would be the laws of nature.
So this nebulous concept of intelligence is being attached to another abstraction.
Laws are would be instructions, not just restrictions.
No, they're descriptions. The laws of nature are descriptive, not prescriptive. They don't.
Descriptive to our subjective view, prescriptive from an objective lens.
No. Physics works the way physics works. Chemistry works the way chemistry works. There's not any reason to presume that there's an intelligence giving out instructions about how hydrogen and oxygen should combine.
Is our view the only view that matters?
I'm not sure.
Our human view, our human perspective.
Our perspective has little to do. It's not even remotely germane to the objective state of affairs. What I think about hydrogen and oxygen has no impact on how they bond to one another, just as the laws of logic, as people like to reference. So you can defer to these abstractions all day long, but they're going to be what they are, regardless if we're here or not to perceive them.
Right. And what I'm saying is that there are laws that exist that we observed and articulated, but we did not create.
Yes.
That we are observing, so that would make them objective and us subjective for describing them.
There are laws that exist that we did not create. Now prove that some other intelligence did create them. This is where you need to demonstrate that a law is prescriptive and from an intelligence and not merely descriptive being recognized by an intelligence.
Okay. The fact that nature and everything in it set up in a certain particular way.
That's a nice presumption.
Everything in it. That's a presumption too?
Yeah. So you're presuming that something set up something.
Set up?
Yes, that everything is set up. How do you demonstrate that?
How do I demonstrate that life was performed, that life is played out incrementally, when that's how we viewed everything in history?
How have you personally ascertained that an entity fiddled with reality? It stuck its tendrils into our reality and crafted these abstractions and these
The fact that there's an order to everything.
Okay. How?
Okay, now your entire argument is we perceive order, therefore there must have been an intelligence who crafted that order. Please demonstrate that the only way to achieve the order we perceive is if there is an intelligence that crafted it.
Because everything that's accidental does not create intelligence from it. And there's life that came from the chaos of the universe.
This is another assertion of yours. Please demonstrate that intelligence can only come from an intelligence.
Intelligence can only come from an intelligence.
So what created the original intelligence?
Nothing created the original intelligence. If it's infinite, it doesn't have a beginning.
Man, that sounds like special pleading to me.
But you still didn't demonstrate that the only way
Hold on, where does science come from? Philosophy, right?
You still haven't demonstrated that an intelligence can only come from an intelligent origin.
Hold on.
No, I asked the question. I asked the question. Stop, Radical, stop. You
just asked me to answer the question.
And now I'm telling you to fucking stop. So stop and
cursing at me, dude.
I'll fucking curse at whoever the fuck I want. Stay on the line, and I will curse your little bitch ass into oblivion. I'm gonna curse. I'm gonna put you on hold so you can listen to me spew forth fucks and shits and whatever the fuck I want. Stop. You called in to argue for a conscious creator of the cosmos. And we asked you to do that. And at every turn, you came up with some sort of loose premise that involves some form of special fucking pleading or certain fucking exemptions or bald-ass fucking assertions. And we have sat here and we've tried to point out and we've asked questions. And you keep getting irritated that we didn't just accept the garbage that you spewed forth initially when all we were doing was trying to guide you towards an actual argument that is cogent and supported by evidence. And every time either one of us have gotten you to amplify what you're saying, you go back to yet another assertion. Well, you can't have intelligence without an intelligence to guide it. You can't have order without an order to guide it. At no point did we say that you were wrong. We asked you to demonstrate that you were correct. So demonstrate that order and intelligence can only come from an intelligence, because that's the whole thing you're trying to do. You are now off hold and free to moan about my cursing.
I just want to have an intelligent conversation, man. I'm actually a big fan of you. I love what you did to Peterson. Anyway, there's also no random. That's also subjective. I'm just going down the plethora of oddities and peculiarities and uncomfortable truths that we avoid in life to try to come to the conclusion that there is no God. And I'm not saying that there's a Christian God. I'm just saying that there is something weird going on in life that lends
No, sir, and now you're lying. Now you are backtracking to the point where you are twisting yourself into knots. First of all, atheism is not the assertion that there is no God, so I don't know why you would do that. You're not just talking about weirdness. You affirmed at the beginning of this call that you believe there is a conscious creator of the cosmos and that you could prove it. You didn't call in and say, hey, there's a bunch of weirdness. I don't think we can conclude there is no God, because if you'd have said that, I'd have said, I agree with you. There's a bunch of weirdness, and maybe we can't conclude that there is no God, or at least...
I said that there was no way to prove it empirically. I said it would have to be done through reason. Go back in the tape. That's what I said.
Did I say you didn't say that?
You just said that no, sir. You just said that there's not a bunch of things. When I said that it's an amalgamation of evidence. It's not just one thing that can be pointed to.
Just a second ago, you backtracked from your original position, which is that there is a conscious creator of the cosmos, to...
And I'm still on that.
Bye. Stay on it, bro.
He's a big fan of the show.
He's a big fan of the show. Where are we going now?
Okay.
We are at the time limit, so we should take...
Two?
We should take two, and then save... So Brett and John stay on, and I'll take the call after this, after the show's over. But here we are. Welcome, Otangelo.
Yes, hello, Matt. Hello, Albert. I I called you 2 months ago, Matt, and you hung up
hang on.
me and asked.
Hang on. You're not talking to me. You're talking to Dragnauct.
Hi.
Hi, Albert. No, actually, I was talking to Matt right now.
No. Okay.
So,
Okay. Maybe this isn't clear. I'm not going to have a conversation with you. You are calling in to speak with Dragnauct.
Okay. That's fine.
Hi.
Hi, Albert. We had some chat on Facebook
Yes.
today and at another few occasions. And we can just continue where we finished. And I think it was about...
Hang on. I'm going to interrupt
amino
again.
acid bond.
I'm going to interrupt again because, first of all, I don't think it would fair be to the Atheist Experience audience for you to continue a conversation. And I don't know why anybody would continue a conversation that they finished. I mean, you said we'd like to continue the conversation that you finished. If you finished the conversation, why were we continuing?
No, it's not in the sense that it was a closed matter. I mean, I left because I had other
it's a closed matter. Thanks, man.
There we go.
As the president of the Atheist Community of Austin, I'm used to at the board meetings, after we finish the old business, we move on to new business. And so if the matter's closed, we'll move on to new business. And on that note, here we go. Brett in Washington, thanks for waiting. It says here you have convincing evidence that the Earth couldn't be here by random chance. And are you there?
Yes. Hi.
Okay. I'd like to say, first of all, who's claiming that the Earth is here by random chance? Because I'm not. I'm not.
Well, I'm not sure I used the words random chance. But,
okay, what would you say?
Naturally occurring.
You're going to prove to us that the Earth cannot be naturally occurring.
That's a bit of a sensationalized headline, but I
what is it you're going to prove?
Okay, so I have a published scientific article from a Swedish team of astrophysicists that's published in an astrophysics journal. And it purports that the Earth is a roughly 1 in 700 quintillion chance of occurring naturally.
And how does that prove that if it's a 1 in 700 quintillion chance, we'll assume that their math is correct. How does that mean that it can't happen? Surely, doesn't that mean that it's 1 in 700 quintillion?
I mean, yeah, that's a very small chance.
So but the paper is affirming that the Earth can occur by natural circumstances. It's just 1 in 700 and some odd quintillion, right?
Yeah.
How many planets are there?
Well, they go into that in the study. They actually have a number. It's like, what is it? 2 times 10 to the 19th power and 7 times 10 to the 20th power, somewhere in there.
A lot.
Yeah. Lots
a
and
lot
of
terrestrial planets, yeah.
Yeah. Have we divided the two?
I mean, that's interesting to me, you know?
It's interesting to me, too. But the fact of the matter is the Earth exists. I think we would both agree, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the odds of winning some lotteries are 1 in 65 million, right? Or roughly?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And yet, doesn't somebody win some lottery pretty much every week or every couple weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
so
65 million is a lot less than 700 quintillion.
I agree. I know how fucking math works. I'm just saying that if the fact that something is unlikely is irrelevant once it has in fact occurred. And so what you would need to demonstrate, not that it's incredibly unlikely that the Earth exists or it's incredibly unlikely that I exist, but what the explanation for that is. And you cannot go from, wow, this seems really unlikely, therefore it's more likely that a God did it, unless you've got some probability for God you can demonstrate.
I don't have a probability, but
then we're done.
Can I just mention something from the article?
Thanks. People can look up the articles on their own about that. We'll go ahead and take John on this. John in New York, thanks for waiting. You are the final caller for the show.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so I was, what's up, Matt? I was just wondering, I watched a debate between you and Jay Dyer.
Yeah.
And the debate got into a thing about the laws of logic, right? And it came to the point where I think what you were trying to get across is that you don't think that you didn't see any demonstration that you needed to give a justification or a foundation for the laws of logic. Is that about right?
Correct. Essentially, I don't have to know how a gasoline engine works to be able to tell you whether or not it is working, to be able to drive my car and tell you whether it's functioning at least acceptable. And so Jay's objection was that if you don't have an explanation for the laws of logic, you can't then use them. And my response is that that's simply not true. I can use the laws of logic irrespective of whether or not I know why they work or whether or not anybody knows why they work. Their working is self-demonstrated.
I think it was not as much about, with Jay at least, I'm not here to defend Jay, right? But
sure.
It seemed like it was more with Jay is how in your worldview can the idea of laws of logic be made an intelligible and meaningful concept? Would you agree that when we talk about laws of logic or uniformity in nature, that if we're trying to be consistent with with rationality and the conditions of reason, that we're to give try to give a rational justification or a basis in our worldview for how these concepts and how these things exist?
Yes, it would be very nice if we understood how they exist or why they exist. But it may be, I see no reason to presume that there is such an explanation. It could just be true, in that sense. Yes, it would be very nice. But the fact that we can't give an explanation for it does not mean that they don't work. And it does not mean that Jay's proposed explanation is the right one.
Right. So do you think that we have to justify the truth of the laws of logic, or that the laws of logic exist?
No, the laws of logic don't exist, and we don't have to justify. What ends up happening is these things are used and constantly shown to work, just as if I picked up a pen or pencil and wrote with it. And until such time as the pen stops writing, until such time as logic demonstrates that it doesn't work, we just keep going with it. And the problem there becomes, in order to prove that they work, you would have to assume that they work. And in order to prove that they don't work, you would have to assume that they work. And this would also be true for anything that you would propose as a foundation for them. So it appears that we are stuck for, at least for now, and perhaps forever, not having the sort of foundation we would like to have for the laws of logic, which is why I don't claim to be absolutely certain about anything, just maximally certain for those things that are deductively arrived directly from the laws of logic, like math.
Right. So, but the thing is, when we talk about worldviews, when we talk about, I guess what Jay was getting at was the transcendental line of reasoning, and what others like
and I apologize, we're out of time. We're actually over time. Jay's worldview includes an explanation for the laws of logic, but there's no demonstration that his worldview is correct. My worldview...
Yeah, but that's not... But the demonstration is the impossibility of the contrary. It would be that when you deny God...
There's been no demonstration of the possibility of the contrary.
I think there has.
Okay, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I listened to that debate. Spoke to Ozzy and Malpass, and painful.
Yeah, if there had been a demonstration that you can't have logic without God, well, then I wouldn't be arguing with you anymore, and there'd be a Nobel Prize for that, and it would have set all of philosophy on its head. It's like, you might as well be calling in to say, we've solved the problem of hard solipsism. No, you fucking haven't. The very nature of the foundational laws of logic, for those who aren't aware, we're talking about identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. You would have to assume they're true to even try to prove they're false, and that leads to a contradiction. The problem there is the only reason a contradiction is a problem is because of the law of non-contradiction. But when we keep using these, it's like we've got a ruler and we keep measuring things with it all over the world. And these people are saying, yeah, but you don't know why an inch is an inch. I don't care why an inch is an inch. I still know that this is 8 inches. I know that, and I was talking about the width between my hands. I was approximating. So to say that I need to understand where an inch comes from in order to be able to measure is wrong. Let's say that we did not have the history of an inch, and we lost that. We've had all kinds of weird measurements, especially, it's from your nose to there, and it's this part of your arm, and it's this person's foot is how we get to a foot. Maybe we lost all that. And we're in a position where we can never again attain that knowledge because it's just lost to antiquity. Wouldn't change the fact that we have a standardized foot and we can measure with it.
Right. Right, like the source of the metric isn't really as important as how the metric is used. As long as it's consistent and other people can intelligibly understand it and utilize it, then, I mean, you can create all kinds of rationales or explanations as to why it is the way it is. But
and if you come to me and you say, here's the real reason why a foot is a foot. It's because this particular person, that's how long their foot was. Well, that's cool.
Okay.
Prove it. And you can say, I think it has been proven. And I'm just going to keep saying, no, it hasn't. You became convinced of it, but that's not the same thing as providing evidence for it. And it's much, much easier to provide evidence if we have the historical documents that say, yes, it was this person's foot and all this stuff, and it's an utterly mundane claim. It's a vastly different thing to claim that you, in your worldview, have appealed to a magical being that exists outside of space and time, is the conscious creator of the cosmos, who fails to provide any empirical evidence for its existence, expects us to rely entirely on reason, and that we should then determine that reason wouldn't work without that God, therefore that God must exist. And no, that's not a circular argument. Even though it is, it's a virtuously circular argument instead of a viciously circular. Bullshit. I don't care if you're Jay, I don't care if you're Cy, Matt Slick, Greg Bonson, whichever one of you pre-subs out there has decided that you've cracked the mystery of logic in the universe and therefore it conveniently happens to be your God, you're wrong. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks to the folks who are on the other side of the wall. Dragnaught, thanks so much for hanging out with us this week, answering questions. There's the guys on the other side of the wall who make the show happen. If you're an atheist in the building's open from 11 to 9, 7 days a week. We're about to have dinner here shortly at the building. Please enjoy your holidays. We'll see you again next year.
See ya.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.